Behind the Shades.
My name is Andrea. I founded our Daydream back in 2018, which is kind of a journey with God. And so the way that had came about was that I spent 34 years of my life in depression and kind of realized that I was causing a lot of that trauma myself. So I started going on a journey to really trying to figure out why I do the things that I do and how I can change that. And so our Daydream is not only a journey as to what God has, me doing, but it's also trying to give that awareness of the things that I've learned to kind of get me out of depression, but also to keep me from going back to depression.
So when you went through that depression, what was the time period? Like, well, how long ago was that?
I am 40 this year. So, yeah. So
Well, happy
what,
40th birthday.
6 years? Yeah. Thank you.
So 6 years ago, you had this situation, and I love that you mentioned the religious part of it, because religion, I think you and I have indirectly kind of communicated that it's a big part of both of our lives. How much of a role did it play for you when you're going through what you're going through 6 years ago and as you continue forward today?
So 6 years ago, I had found myself leaving a partner for the second time and starting over with children and being a single parent yet again. And I was just utterly broken. And there was a man that I honestly didn't care for. That he said, I don't want to know what's happening with you. I don't have to know your story. He said, but can I just pray for you? Well, for all those years before that, I was an atheist. I didn't believe in God. And, I just kept putting one step in front of the other, only to hit my head off the wall. And when the man had prayed for me, I felt the strength of God in that moment. And I realized that God was so much more than anything you could learn on Sundays from just listening to a pastor or anything that you could read in the book. He can touch you, and he can give you the strength whenever you need it. And so, that was the beginning stages of the evolution of this learning. It's like once I felt that touch, it was almost like I was being pulled into the healing.
When I first came into the good word, I was very young, and for the most part, I had absolutely no idea what I was learning. I think, like many of us, right? We're kids, we're going because our parents bring us, and we don't necessarily understand. But I know that the clothes were fancy, the pants kind of itch on the Sunday when I went
Right.
there. But then there was a disconnect of myself and the church. But in my later teenage years, similar to your story, I was not in the best of spaces in my life. But someone came up to me, they had a conversation. Have you considered this? It was nothing about religion. They said, have you considered this? And I said, no, I haven't. That sounds very interesting. Please tell me more. And we had a conversation. And to me, it felt like time stopped. I don't remember how long the conversation was. I don't know how many words or sentences were exchanged, but he just said, how about you come here and let's further this conversation? And this was a group setting for those who are worried about some older man approaching some teenage man, right?
Right.
And from that point on, I knew that, hey, this is for me because it's speaking to me, but most importantly, it's speaking through me. Did you have that type of moment when you're like, aha, I'm being touched by something that's bigger than this world?
Yeah, and that was in that moment of prayer. But I think what really added the power to that is that I had basically hid in a room while I was working as a CNA because if anybody would have said, "Are you okay?" which they would have, I probably would have cried for days. And so I was hiding in a resident's room that was actively dying. And little did I know, but I kind of had the inclination that she was only going to be around for a short time, and she only lasted maybe 12 hours after that. So she was close to dying. But for some reason that night, she wasn't talking like she was previously. And she rubbed my arm and she said, "Just believe." And that was the only words that I could get out of her mouth that day. And that was the last words that she had spoken, was "just believe." And I don't know if the angels were close to her too, that it made it that powerful. But as soon as he prayed for me, my tears dried up. And where I had originally felt like I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to be able to do all these things that I need to do in these weeks to come. And I'm not strong enough to do this. I felt all this strength, like I got this, I can do this. And so it was an overflow of love and, strength and power and might. And yeah. But honestly, for a year and a half after that, I still was a believer. I still hadn't given my life to Christ. And so it was definitely that moment of dying a year and a half later to myself, where I just couldn't stand who I was anymore, that I decided to die to who I was to gain this walk with Christ. That was the real turning point, I think, in my life.
When you realized that turning point, did you have a moment of reflection thinking, I used to be this way, now I'm a totally different Andrea today?
I think it took a while to really. I think it was months after that I was just realizing, wow, like how much God was pouring into me, knowledge and information and direction and people and all these things, that it probably took about a year. And I thought, well, if God pulled me this far, so far in just a year, like Lord knows how far I'm going to be in 10 years. It was like an acceleration of self. And definitely, a lot of people would run into me at that time period and was like, "What happened to you?" And they're like, "You're a completely different human being." Like, what happened? And I was like, "God." They're like, "No, what really happened?" I'm like, "God." The answer is not going to change. It was, God. And yeah, it's incredible that you don't really know who you are, your identity at all, until you decide to give that identity that you thought was you away.
Was it a little scary for you, the amount of changes that was happening in such a short period of time?
uh I wouldn't say that that was scary. No. I'd say the directions that God had moved me in was rather scary, because it's almost like you're walking on a solid surface, but the surface just kept breaking loose and opening up, and you kept falling down in a little further. And so, um, little by little, God plucks out of your life the things that are hurting you. And that's scary, because I once relate it is, it's like God takes you for a walk into this huge jungle. And, you know, when you're a little bit of a ways in, you could still see where you were. That's not really that scary. But the further you progress into this jungle, you don't really know your way back to who you were, and you don't really know where you're heading or like you don't even know if you're going in a direction at all. And that is scary. And it's that point where you realize that I have to put God into, every step that I take, because if not, I'm going to start panicking, because I literally have no idea where I'm at right now. And you lose your identity, so you can't even go back to that. That's petrifying. Yeah.
Walk by faith, not by sight is such an
Yeah.
important saying, right?
Right. And I think once you decide to fully die to who you were, um, there is no vision. Like, you really don't know what is ahead. So you have to almost walk by that faith, or you're just gonna, you know, you're just, it's scary. It's scary. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because that's what I felt. But I felt it twofold. I felt that it was scary because I was becoming something where at that time I didn't know if I could fulfill what I knew that I was
Hmm.
becoming. So I kind of shied
Yeah.
away. I was like, okay, let me take a step back from this because it's what some people today would call overwhelming. You're achieving things that you're like, hey, this is bigger than me. This is bigger
Yeah.
than the world. But can I do it? So when I pulled away, I was a little hesitant because I just didn't know if I was prepared for that task. But fast forward a few years later, here I am doing it again for the second time. But I feel that I'm more prepared because maybe it was a test that was like, hey, this is what your future is going to be like. Are you ready? Can you get ready? And
Right.
for you, Andrea, are you ready? Or can you get ready?
Right. It's definitely a process, and I really have to look into the fact, because I'll nonstop do things, and I'll think that I'm really getting nowhere with it and achieving nothing. When you look back, you see that you had moved, but in the moments, it's, really, just staying in it and understand that God's in it. It's like, this stuff isn't in vain. Even the smallest things, that you do throughout the day is incremental to the process that God has you on. And so, it's definitely, I can say that I'm in the pruning process.
So take us through some of the work that you've done. You mentioned to me you have Our Daydream. That's something that is very close to your heart. That is something that is very important to what you do. So take us through that because what you're doing is an amazing, amazing work.
Thank you so much. Um, I'm, they say to have a direction in which the way that you're going. I think that that would be the easiest route, is to actually, be able to define what it is that you're doing and go in that direction. But then you also read in the Bible that God gives you talents. And so, are you going to bury those talents, or are you going to multiply those talents? And so it kind of puts me in this place where I do a lot of different things. So I write blogs. I do a column on my website, and then I also love to draw. And so I'm an artist as well. And I started a podcast last year, January 2022, where I started interviewing other people, and then I also, do a ministry. And so there's a lot of different ways. And I suppose it's, what's God asking me to do today? And that's what I do. So I wouldn't really say that I have a direction, but what it really is I don't want anybody to feel like I felt. I don't want anybody to feel like they're stuck. I don't want anybody to feel like they're alone. But what I really want is for people to join this journey that me, like, we both have taken, and really, walk out that walk by faith. And so, yeah.
And when you're helping people join your journey, how much of yourself, Andrea, are you putting forward into these people? Because you may be able to identify with, okay, Sally reminds me of me 5 years ago. Jane reminds me of me 3 years ago. Like, how much of
Right.
yourself are you putting into your journey and our daydream journey?
Right. I literally lay everything out. My soul is tied into our daydream, from the posts that I share out to the blogs that I write. I'm not trying to hide any trial or error that I'm going through. I literally lay my whole life down. And my past to my present to whatever it is that God's telling me to relate. And so people really know Andrea. It's not just trying to relay a message. It's like, this is what I'm going through, or this is what I went through, because I feel like for the unbelievers out there, you really have to bring forth your testimony. If you're putting on this face that says, I'm not going through any trial and I, praise Jesus all day long and life's perfect, we can see through people, right? People say something, we can see through it. If I say I'm having a good day and I'm really having a bad one, people know better just by, my energy that I'm putting off. And so, it doesn't seem realistic, right? And so, but what I give away is everything that God's walking me through and God's showing me. Maybe it might be something that somebody else can relate to. Maybe they might be going through that too, and maybe God hadn't gave them that word yet, and so maybe I could be that confirmation.
And while you're doing this as someone that is very transparent. You're open about your relationships, how they've turned out. You've mentioned you have children, or I think it's one child you have. Is that
Three.
correct? You
I
have
have
three
three.
children.
Yeah.
So if there's someone out there that's a single parent and they're like, Andrea, I'm a single father. I'm a single mother. I have one child, two child, four childs, 100 children. Like some
Yeah.
of the biblical stories, right? They have all these children
Right.
and they're trying to figure it out and say, help me find my talents like how you were helped to find yours. What would you tell that person and why?
I think it's so easy for a single parent to get caught up in doing. There's so much to do. You have to go to work. You have to provide. You have to take care of the household. Like, it's for me. I was a mother and a father. Like, my kids give me a Father's Day card as well on Father's Day, and so, uh, you have so much on your plate, and you would get so caught up in doing and taking care of everybody in the home, and it it's not beneficial to your children to um bringing them up as adults that aren't stressed out. It's not beneficial to your mental health, to your physical health. It's not. And so it's really understanding, like, who am I without having to take care of all these responsibilities? Who am I without that? And it's taking time to really explore yourself and what you like. And in order to do that, you have to, take time out for yourself. You have to experiment different things that you might enjoy and appreciate, and actively bring that into your life. And the more that you, see the things that you appreciate and love, the more your purpose starts opening up, because you start healing too. And so it's really taken that time to be, it's so easy to say, I don't have a half an hour in my day, but you really do, and so, and I did it for a long time. Like I don't have enough time to take time for myself. You have to force yourself to do that daily to tap into yourself, but also, as far as faith goes, to tap into God. And we need that throughout our walk. It reduces our stress, and it, brings our kids more happiness because we're more happy. And uh yeah, you get caught up on that conveyor belt or that hamster wheel where you're just doing the repetition, same thing every day, day in and day out.
It goes back to the saying that someone has been a mother or a father so long that they don't even remember life before they were a parent,
Yeah.
right? They've been a wife or a husband so long they don't remember who they were before they had these commitments. How do you help them re-identify, or as you mentioned, tap in to say, you are these things still, but do you remember who you were before this? How do you get them to tap into that person?
I feel like I feel like that we need to realize that we're always in motion. Time doesn't stand still. I could read a book today and change everything that I am, just by reading that book. And I think back to the moment where I realized that I was giving myself depression. I had a man say to me, like, I know that you have a lot on your plate and I understand you're stressed out, but can you please see your blessings? And I realized in that moment that I never looked at my blessings. I only looked at the things that I needed to do and all these things on my plate. And so it takes but a moment in time for you to change your whole entire outlook. So I don't really think it's much more to do with going back to who you were before that you had kids. I think it's more along the lines of, taking that time out for yourself every day to want to learn more about who you are. And I think that, reading and learning and, motivational tapes. And I love YouTube for that. Like if I'm going through a hard time that day, all I have to do is put into YouTube search the things that are bothering me that day, and a great motivational tape will come up that will teach me a different way to view it. And so it's really being open for that process of, identifying your defaults and, how can I fix these defaults, and being a student and wanting to learn, more about your inner workings daily. And I know for me, I don't want to go back to who I was before I was a parent.
Do you have flashes of that person that you used to be and you're like, oh, I used to be like that? No, thank you. Does that person still pop up every once in a while, Andrea?
That's so funny that you bring that up, because I've been brought to this. I had a prophet lady reach out to me, and she told me the other day that she saw me sitting in a garden with the light shining down on me, and I had all this peace. And I thought to myself that I was King Nebuchadnezzar, like the beast in the wilderness is what I was feeling whenever she said that to me. I don't feel like this girl. And so God started putting me on this process where at first, the first meditation I went to, I took myself into this garden, and I was about 5 years old, and I consoled her. And so today, this morning, I took another traumatizing time of my life, and that person, and took her. And so whenever I come out of this meditation, it brought back these memories of who I was then. I was the life of the party at the clubs. And so I would walk into the club and they would play my favorite song because they knew I was going to pull people out onto the dance floor, and they knew that people would start dancing. I wouldn't even get 2 steps in and my song would come on. And so I thought about that, but I thought about how awesome that would be, that because there was so much trauma that happened since then that kind of dimmed that light about me, that I was the life of the party. But how cool would that be? I was thinking to incorporate that into, my Jesus walk and my ministries and the different things that I do on our daydream. How cool would that be to bring that girl with me, but have her, be reborn again too into this walk that I'm on now. So
So, Andrea, it sounds like you have established this well balanced person. You mentioned that there's a time in your life where you were that person on the dance floor. You mentioned how you had depression. You mentioned how you changed your life, and it's all been centered around your faith and how strong that is. At this point in your life, how much of a protector is your faith to you?
yeah, I don't know. Faith is, I feel like faith was brought to me in a different way than I've ever heard faith brought to me from any other person in the world. And, you know, whenever I think about faith, I think about Peter and how he, you know, denied Christ 3 times. And it's these things that we do wrong under God because we want to show up for God in the way that we know that God wants us to show up. And sometimes we fall short in those areas. And it's the condemnation, I think, that holds us to, repeating these different things about us. And so faith faith is a huge part of my day. I have to have faith that, I might have said the wrong things right now. I'm going to have faith that God's going to work. Like there was a reason for that, and God's going to use that. That, just the same as Peter betraying Christ 3 times, that was a part of the prophecy that had to take place for us to be saved. And so I just got to think to myself that that's part of, what God wants to be done on this earth, but also um, faith definitely guides my steps. It's, yeah, I would be dead without faith I mean,
When I
yeah,
look at my faith, I look at it as in the good book where it mentions you want to adorn your armor, right? From the helmet to your sword to your loins to your boots, everything, your shield, right? You
yeah,
want to be fully clothed in it because when I was brought into it, I was very young. And then I stepped away because of my parents' situation. They divorced and you kind of had your distance. And then I was brought back into it the first time as an adult, but the second time in my life. And then I kind of was hesitant because, as I mentioned, I wasn't fully prepared in my mind.
yeah,
But then when I got back the third time, like you mentioned, Peter, 3 times, right? The
yeah,
third time, it was like, this is for me because it's always been for me. And one of the books in the Bible that I love is the book of Romans because I feel that book speaks to me, how it talks about people coming into the faith and becoming a better person. That was
right.
like one of the overall themes because when I point back to it, I always point back to that. And one of the beautiful things that I will always remember is one day with God is like 1,000 days, right? Like you want to yearn for that connection.
Right.
When you speak to the men and women you speak to, or when you speak to the next generation, what's something that you would share with them to help inspire them and to keep them strong when speaking to them?
Um, I think that a lot of times whenever I speak to people, we have a lot of things happen throughout the day, and sometimes we're going to walk in, areas that are uncomfortable and, that hurt. And so I think the most important part of prosperity is just understanding that is understand it's not in vain. Like there's a reason for it. We don't know what's going to happen and, after our life. We don't know what's happening in, all these things that we're walking through. We don't know who is getting saved because like, we just really don't know the bigger picture and what these things are that we're walking through. We can only see what's in front of our eyes. And so, I think it's important to just allow things to happen, allow things to move and just walk through that and understanding that there's things happening outside of our view that we have no idea. The magnitude of the beauty that's happening in just chaos. So, and I think it's the chaos or these breaking points that, we carry around as backpacks and end up, keeping us defeated on those days where we should be feeling victorious. And if we're not really holding these things so much to as their concrete evidence of what's happening right now in my world, then, it's easier to maneuver the terrains that we're going to walk throughout this life. So,
Are there still days where you feel that that backpack you're carrying is heavier today than it was yesterday?
absolutely. And I really do feel like this walk with God is a process. If only we could just be like a light switch and be like, I'll fix. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that we've all dealt with trauma. Every human on the planet has dealt with trauma in one spectrum or another. And so, but also we've dealt with corruption. And so we've been spoken against and told that we're not good enough whenever God says that we are. And, we learn all these things from our environments until we realize that it's inaccurate. And so I really think that it's a process with God. If only there could be like a finish line where like, yes, I hit that place where I don't have to attend to these traumas anymore or these things that I'm walking through, and I can just elevate above all these circumstances all the time. But it's a constant reminder of God's goodness, but also it really does pull us closer to the spiritual essence of us, which I mean is our freedom from it all. But it's definitely, we're flesh, so we're gonna war against ourselves, I guess.
And that's the beauty. And I'm glad you mentioned that. It's we know what the finish line looks like: everlasting life,
Right.
right? Peace on everlasting life, and just peace and happiness, abundance, right? So much
Right.
peace, so much happiness, you probably wouldn't even know what to do with it all,
Right.
right? It's the journey that is different for me, for you, and for everyone listening, because my journey may be longer than yours, maybe more difficult than yours, maybe more arduous, right?
Right.
And I think sometimes people tend to be a little frustrated or a little bit exhausted of that, because they're like, I know the finish line, it's never coming. I've been trying, I've been trying. But something that I like to tell them is that's the whole point, is
I
that you're
love that.
trying, right? So if someone would have come to you, Andrea, and say that, I just don't know about this, Andrea. You sound nice, you look nice. I can totally understand how it's helped you, but I don't know if I'm built for the long haul, because it's a marathon, not a sprint. How would you help guide that person?
Just somebody that's ready to give up.
Yeah, someone that's ready to give up because they don't know how long they can keep going on the journey.
Right. And so I was brought to a place of just really wanting to die. I didn't want to walk the walk anymore. I didn't have the strength for it, and I was done. but I didn't. And so, it's these moments where we really want to give up, where things are breaking off of us. It's much like tears. Tears are, when you cry, hormones release throughout your body, and they soothe you. And so it's these moments of weakness where you're losing that weakness, because, you have a choice. You could give up. But if you're going to keep going, you're going to find that strength again. It's going to happen. It in the Bible, it says, through your weakness, you're being perfected, or, I can't remember the exact wording of the scripture, but it takes the weakness to really gain the strength of God. Like, and it's so true that whenever we're weak, He is strong. And it's really tapping into that, but it's also understanding. I hope that I go through many deaths throughout my life. It's such a beautiful blossoming of who it is, and uncovering more of who I am and the strength that exists inside of me. It's painful in the moment, but it does, bloom out to something really beautiful. And so I suppose that it would be, you could give up, but you're missing the opportunity for this blossoming of who you are. So